to get started. If you haven't had a chance to use your dots yet, you'll have an opportunity to do that once we get into the breakout sessions. So if we could ask everybody to find a seat or an area where they're comfortable standing. Those that are in line will get you registered so you can participate as well. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I have to say I am very excited. My name is Melissa Santucci-Rossi. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development and the Project Manager for our Master Plan initiatives here in Braintree. And I see a lot of familiar faces, but I see a ton of unfamiliar faces, which really gets me excited. We're trying our best to do outreach. We ask everyone here to talk to a friend or a neighbor about the event and help us spread the word. There will be more events. All the information can be found on the town website that links you right up to our dedicated master plan page. So we've got an exciting agenda this afternoon. We have some words from our mayor, Mayor Kokoris. We have a brief presentation from our consultant team, and then we'll get out into the breakout sessions, which I know everybody is really dying to get over to those. So I'm going to be really quiet and introduce our mayor, Mayor Charles Kokoris.
Thank you, Ms. Santucci. I just want to recognize a few folks that I see out here in the audience. Our Council President, Meredith Baraka, School Committee Chairperson, Lisa Eager. I think also we have other members of the Council. We have Councilor Maglio and School Committee member, I think there's another School Committee member here, Tuffy. Okay. Did I miss anyone? Oh, I think you're on a different list, though. So first of all, I just want to say that this is really an exciting day because we waited so long because of the pandemic. We wanted to make sure that we could have events like this where everyone could come together and we could all talk about the future of the town of Braintree. And, you know, after, you know, all of the year-long run through the comprehensive rezone, which was pulled prior to me getting into office, everybody said we need to do a new master plan. And the last time we did a master plan, I just happened to be on the planning board. That was one of the first, you know, boards I was on. So that was finished in 1998. So I mean, Braintree has changed quite a bit since 1998, as we all know. So this is a great opportunity for everyone to really participate. I don't think we really had as much participation back in the late 90s. I think it was primarily done by the planning board. There was some public input, but we wanted this to be all about public input and what the public has to say about the future of Braintree and how they want the future of Braintree to be. And that's why it's so important to have you all here today. And I'm just so grateful that everyone decided to come here instead of going to the beach, because I know that it's pretty nice out today. But I just wanted to mention the folks that are working on this. We have a great consultant, and it's J.M. Goldson, and Jen Goldson and Delaney Almond, Kittleson Associates, Juliet Walker, RKG Associates, and Chris Hurlick. So this group is like the dream team for master plans, and we, you know, everything happens for a reason. You know, we had to postpone because of the pandemic, and we ended up with a great consultant that really gets it, and we're really excited to be working with them. In addition to that, you know, we have Melissa Santucci, who is our planning director, and Connor Murphy. Both bring so much to the table in the area of planning. And I thank our steering committee members, Chair, who couldn't be here today, Jennifer Wadlin, Kay Young, our Vice Chair, who was here today, David Cunningham, who was here today, Julia Flaherty, who is also a counselor, who was here today, Peter Herbst, who is here today, Erin Joyce, who's the Chair of the Planning Board, who was here today, Shana Barnes-Monroe, who was absent, Shelley North, who was here today, Elizabeth Page, who was here today, and Joseph Reynolds, who is also a counselor who is here today, and absent is Raina Rubin. And I will tell you that this is such a great group of individuals with all different backgrounds, and I think that they complement one another, and they've worked so hard to get to this point, and I'm so proud of these members that are volunteering. I think, it would be appropriate right now to give them a nice round of applause for everything they've done so far. And with that, I will just say that, the master plan was one of the things that I really wanted to see happen when I was running, and I am just so excited that we have reached this point now, and we are making our way through to really shape the future of our community. So I thank everybody that is here today, everyone that's watching, for participating and giving us your ideas so that we can mold those ideas into Braintree's next decade in the future of our town. I just want to say thank you. And introduce our consultant, Jen. Watch that cord.
We're very carefully stepping over a cord here so nobody goes flat on their face. I'm Jen Goldson. I'm really pleased to be here, and it's, being called a dream team is quite an honor, so thank you. I hope we can live up to that. We are just so excited that you are all here, and we really want to thank you for spending your time with us. We're going to make it very worthwhile for you. And what we're going to do first is just go through a little bit of information about what we've done so far, give you some framework for how this process unfolds, and then most of the time today will be spent walking around this room and interacting with these boards, telling us what you think, as well as talking to the master plan committee members and members of our team. But before we send you off doing that, we want to give you a strong grounding in, well, what are we even doing and how does this all work? So the mayor already read out the names of the master plan committee members, and what I would just like to say is if all of the master plan committee members who are here, if you could just stand up so people can see you, and they will, and wave if you were already standing and you're, yeah, okay, good. So those are, yeah, thank you. And so we're really excited to work with them, and you'll get a chance to, they'll all be scattered at these various stations so you can walk around and talk to them all and get to know them as well, and more importantly, we want to get to know you. So our project team, as the mayor said, is here. If you all could just stand up and face the audience. We've got Delaney from J.M. Goldson, Chris Hurlick from RKG, and Juliet Walker from Kittleson. And what we're doing is J.M. Goldson, Delaney, and I are really leading the project. We'll be at pretty much every single meeting, all of the meetings like this, all of the master plan committees, and then we brought in specialists in economic development, public facilities and infrastructure, and transportation. And so Chris from RKG and his team are specialists in economic development, public infrastructure, and public services. And then Juliet Walker and her team at Kittleson are experts in transportation. And so we're really excited to have, brought all of this expertise to you today, because you can really start to pick our brain and walk around and ask questions as well. Okay, so let me just go through a few fundamentals. So what is a master plan even? You've been talking about it for a while. The mayor gave you a nice kind of background leading up to how have you come in the past few years to even wanting to do this. It's really, ultimately, it will be a document that will provide the boards and committees and the people who end up making decisions about what is funded in this community, what are the initiatives we're focused on in the next 10 years. It's going to be a way to respond to change. So we all know that communities are changing all the time. People move in, people move out, you have all sorts of development, and all sorts of things are happening in the community. And the master plan helps you guide those changes. I just mentioned 10 years, and that's because most master plans are 10-year time frames. Sometimes they go beyond that, but for the most part, we look at the next decade out because we feel like we can predict fairly well what some of the trends and how things could shape out. And then the last point I would make is that it's a plan that, although it is focused on the physical elements of Braintree, we also like to integrate social and community building elements, so that's all kind of combined into this plan. And so at its heart, we're trying to answer a few questions. And I'm just actually curious, we did our best to make these slides viewable from the back. But can you just raise your hand if you cannot read what's on the slide? You cannot. Okay, thank you. That's good to know because I'm going to read some of it, knowing that some of you can't read it. So a master plan at its heart is really trying to answer, I would say, 4 key questions. And they are, how can we balance competing interests? How can we strategically shape the change that we know is going to happen, but how can we be really strategic about that? Capitalizing on both opportunities, but also preserving the assets, the things that you really love about Braintree, the things that would bring you out on a Saturday afternoon to spend your time with us instead of going about your life. And then, who are you as a community? What is your identity? What is your authentic identity, I would say? What's at the heart of what makes Braintree authentic? And then how can you leverage assets that you have? You all know that you're really well connected to public transportation, and there are all sorts of other assets in this community. How can you leverage that in a way that doesn't actually diminish the things that you love about the town? And so it's really a balancing act. There are 8 essential elements that we'll be working on, and you'll see them around the room here. Land use sort of brings everything together, and that's really how things are all related. So you don't see a board about land use. But what you do see is transportation, economic development, housing, open space and recreation, historic and cultural resources, public facilities and services, and sustainability and resilience. And we're going to talk more about those. We're going to share a little bit about our findings of what we've learned so far about Braintree in those areas. But I would say it's really important, even though we have those areas, those topics scattered all around the rooms in sort of these separate boards and stations, one thing I really want to emphasize to you is that they're all interconnected. You really can't just think about economic development without thinking about open space and recreation and preservation, and how do you balance all of this? And so we like to not do things in silos by only looking at one thing or the other, but really start to think, how do they relate to each other? And how can we shape the community in a way that we feel is well balanced? But I would also say, I love this quote from Rumi, it's out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, and I'll meet you there. I would say that more important than the document we end up with at the end of 18 months is you all coming together and talking to each other, talking to the people kind of leading this process. It's a chance to understand each other more. It's a chance at community building. So I would say that this process and the fact that you're giving your time, and we'll be hopefully continuing to do that over the next course of this project, is more important than what ends up in the plan itself. And so with that being said, what we're going to structure the activities that you'll be involved with over the next 4, 5, 6 months, even the next year, are to really focus in on, well, what are those tensions? We're going to look at what you put on these boards after we're done here today. And we're going to start to really try to understand, well, they're saying something about open space and natural resources, but then on the other side, they're saying something else about economic development. And can we, are there tensions there? Are there competing priorities? And of course there will be, and that's really what is at the heart of this process, is coming together to try to figure out, well, how do we resolve these tensions? How do we find synergies and opportunities, not just look at the tensions? And so it's really about finding a balance. And I would say that you may not all agree at the end of the day. We like to think sometimes that we can really reach a consensus in a community, but I just want to manage those expectations. we'll find a balance that you will tell us, okay, I can live with this balance because I see that there are all these competing interests. But what I want to also say is that the consultant team and even the master plan committee and even the mayor can't tell you for you what that right balance is. And that's why we structure it so that you have a lot of opportunity to tell us where are those tensions and how can we, are there compromises that we can make and what is that right balance? Is this making sense so far, just in a conceptual way? Okay, great. So one of the first things we do, and we've been working on this for a number of months, and we'll share some of these preliminary results today, sometimes we run this at night. We identify, well, what are your assets and what are your liabilities? We try to identify, we look at all of this documentation that we won't go into all the details, but you'll see that there's lots of maps and charts and bullet points. This is kind of the tip of the iceberg of what we've been looking at in the last few months. And what we're trying to tease out are what are the issues, what are those competitions, and then what are the opportunities here. But the other thing that we try to understand, and we can't really do that just by reading and looking at census data, we try to understand what is Braintree, the community of Braintree, you all, what do you actually value? What are your values? And that will really underpin everything that we do. And so some of the questions we're going to ask you today, especially at that station in the back that we'll talk about in a moment, we're trying to ask you, what are the things that you really love about Braintree? Can you sum it up in 3 words? That's one of your stations. We're trying to get at your values. We're trying to see, well, what do you say? There's a lot of different things someone could say to that question. And we look really carefully to see, well, what is this group telling us about what they value about the community? And we also don't start from scratch. We've looked at a lot of documents. The town, Melissa and Connor and the town managers and the town staff has done this big data dump for us where they gave us all sorts of reports and studies and assessments and local data to really study. And so we're bringing that in to the process as well. So the planning process, this is in the first phase. We like to have a kickoff meeting like this when we're just learning about the community. So we're in phase 1, understanding Braintree yesterday and today. And then the next phase, which will start over the summer, will be looking out ahead at, well, what do you envision for the future? And there'll be a lot of engagement opportunities. We'll talk about them today, a little later in this presentation. The next phase is, well, okay, we understand where you are today. We get where you're trying to go, but how do you get there? What do you do to get there? Are there regulations you need to put in place? Are there programs you need to put in place? Are there preservation activities that you need? And that's in phase 3, when we get into the nitty-gritty of how do you actually do it. And then the final phase will be just pulling it all together, shepherding the process of different boards and commissions and town officials and community members reviewing it. And that will be essentially next summer, so almost a year from now, we'll roll out the draft plan for people to really comment on. Another point I like to make while you're all here, I would say that not one of you would be here. Well, perhaps if you work for the town and someone told you you have to be here. That's maybe the only exception I would say to this. But the only other reason you'd be here is if you actually really care about this community. So I'd like you to just look around. I don't know if many of you know each other. Maybe you do, maybe some of you don't. But I would say that you all and others in the community are really the custodians of Braintree. So maybe you've been here a long time. Raise your hand if you've been here more than 30 years. So I would say that's about half of you, which is amazing, have been here more than 30 years. Tell me if you've been here, let's say, between 20 and less than 30 years. Over 20 years, but less than 30. How about 10 to 20 years? And how about 5 to 10 years? How about less than 5 years? A few. All right, awesome. So we have this amazing mix of a lot of people who've been here a really long time, and then a scattering of folks that have come at all different times, including some real newcomers. So what I would say, I just want to put this thought in your head. So all the people that lived before you, do we have any historians in the room, people who know the history of Braintree and sort of have a, okay, nobody. Okay, well, okay, somebody does, okay. Well, I would say, just think, even if you don't know the history, just think about how many thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people have been here before, serving on boards and commissions, making decisions, figuring out where development's going to be. Well, they were here to shape the community before you, and now you're here, and now it's your turn. And I like to view you not just as residents, but you're really taking care of this community. And then eventually you'll pass it on. And so I like to put in your mind that you're really the custodians of this community, and that's why you care enough to be here. And that's why we ask you what you think. Speech is power, words do not fade. What starts as a sound ends as a deed. And so your words have meaning and power, and that's why we ask you to share your words with us throughout this process. All right, so we're going to get into some, a little bit of nitty-gritty, but hopefully not too much, about what we've learned so far in each of those areas. We're going to do a little snapshot of what's on the boards, but not everything. And so, Delaney, I think you're up first. We're going to talk about housing, open space and natural resources, and sustainability, and historic and cultural resources. And then we're going to pass the baton to Juliet, who's going to talk about transportation, and then we're going to wrap it up with Chris, who will talk about economic development and public facilities and services.
Watch out there. Awesome. Thank you, Jen. All right. So I'm going to quickly run through some of these key findings. As Jen said, I can take this off probably. As Jen said, this is a snapshot of the information that we've learned so far. There's a lot more information on the boards, so make sure you take some time in the open house section to get into some more of those key findings. But very quickly, so for housing, we have found that population has been growing at a faster rate than housing units, which contributes to an increase in housing prices and an increase in demand for housing in town. We've also found that 2/3 of Braintree's housing stock is made of single-family homes. And ultimately, Braintree is changing. The average Braintree household couldn't afford to buy a home here today. We found that the median sales price is $615,000, which you would need an income of about $154,000 to comfortably afford the median sales price, but that the Braintree median income is $101,500. So affordability is an issue for housing. We've also found that there is a mismatch between the average housing size and the household size in town. So you can see that the people per household, majority are smaller households, 1 to 2 people, but that a majority of the homes in Braintree are 3 or more bedrooms, so that creates a mismatch there. Right, next, so for open space, natural resources, and recreation, open spaces in Braintree account for about 25% of the land area. We've also found that the town has recently upgraded a bunch of recreation facilities and offers a wide variety of programs for recreation. When we look at open spaces, we look for areas of critical environmental concern, priority habitat of rare species, critical natural landscapes, and core natural habitats. And we found that the Cranberry Pond Conservation Area is a key resource for all of those types of resources, and it's used for recreation, which is awesome. For sustainability and resilience, we captured a bunch of trends here that are, come from New England, Massachusetts, and Braintree locally. So we found that temperatures increased by about 2% between 1895 and 2011. Precipitation has increased by about 10% from 1960 to 2010. Sea level has risen about 11 inches from 1921 to 2016. And that power generation and gas leaks are responsible for over 16,000 carbon dioxide equivalent metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions yearly. Great, so for historic and cultural resources, we have a timeline here of the history, the early history of Braintree. So in 1634, Braintree, Quincy, Holbrook, and Randolph annexed to Boston. In 1640, the Braintree incorporated. In 1644, ironworks built in Braintree, which was really important to the shipping industry. In 1655, the land was deeded to town by the Wampatuck, leader of the Massachusetts tribe of the Algonquin people. In the mid-1800s, the railroad arrived, and in the early 1900s is when suburban development started in town. Braintree also adopted the Community Preservation Act in 2002 and has raised $16 million to date. And of that $16 million, a lot has gone towards historic preservation. And CPA-funded projects for historic preservation include Town Hall and Main Street restoration, improvements to historic schools and buildings, the scanning of historical records, and the acquisition of a historic property at Liberty and Grove. The Braintree Town Center Historic District was established in 1980, and it contains 19 properties, including the Thayer Academy. The Blue Hills Reservation Parkways are network of roads that provide access to the Blue Hills Reservation, and it's a National Register Historic District that's partially located in town. Great, and I'll pass it over to Juliet, and then Chris, and I'll come back after.
Thanks, Delaney. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Juliet Walker, and I'm with Kittleson and Associates, and we'll be leading the transportation, circulation, and transit component of the master plan. So I'll talk about a few of the highlights or key findings that we've found to date that you'll see more of on the board, as Delaney explained. But I would start by just saying that, like the master plan, we see a transportation system as a connected network. So we're not necessarily going to be focusing on how the roads are congested over here, and maybe the transit needs more frequency over here, and maybe more bikers need more facilities citywide. We're going to think about how all of those influence each other. And we'll be receiving a lot of information from the community about how those systems work together and separately, and thinking about ways we can make recommendations to position you for building a better overall transportation system. Some of the trends we're going to be noting also are informed by data that was collected prior to the pandemic. So we're also going to be thinking about how COVID might have influenced some of the data that we're presenting and summarizing for you today, because we really haven't had a chance to get that data. It's so fresh. So we're going to be thinking about what are the trends nationwide that we're seeing, what are the trends in the region, and how might those be changing how people are getting around in your community in the future. As of 2019, most people who worked in Braintree lived outside the community. So you had a lot of people coming in to work. Vice versa, you had people who lived here commuting outside to work outside the community. There was also statistics on how much transportation costs for communities families and households in Braintree, and that's reflective of the fact that many people were commuting outside the community. 15% of Braintree households were heavily burdened by both housing and transportation costs combined. And compared to the region, more people tend to drive to work, fewer people tend to walk and bike to work. Again, that's reflective of the trend of commuting outside the community to work. We also will be looking at safety, and again, a trend you probably are familiar with, crashes. And fortunately, our roads in particular are becoming more unsafe, both at the local level, regionally, and nationally. So we're going to be thinking about not just looking at the data about where crashes have occurred, but also thinking about anticipating where there are unsafe conditions that could lead to harm. And that, as a transportation planner, you would rather be preventing the tragedies from happening. You don't want to be just reacting all the time. So we'll be looking at, again, being informed by the community and the process, but we'll be looking at how we can help design a safe system. And again, looking at how different components of that transportation network may or may not influence other components. If you're going to be trying to improve congestion through an intersection, are you doing that at the risk of making it maybe more unsafe for pedestrians or bicyclists? What are the pros and cons of that result? So we do have data about unfortunately, the number of crashes that have occurred. Again, we're looking at data that's a few years old, but I would say generally we are seeing an increase across the board, which is an unfortunate thing. We have, between 2017 and 2019, there were about 2,200 crashes reported. We've broken those down, and you'll see those on the display about how many of those were involved fatalities or serious injury, as well as how many involved property damage. And then we're also looking at what crashes were involving a bicyclist. In those 2 years, 4 crashes involved a bicyclist, 24 were reported to have involved a pedestrian. We don't always have great data on bike and pedestrian crashes because sometimes they don't go reported. You tend to get more of the vehicular crashes that are reported. But again, we'll be looking at that data and looking at trends and understanding both nationally and regionally how those might be reflected in our local community. Thank you. Now, pass it off to Chris.
Thank you, Juliet. So economic development means a lot of things. A lot of people think about it just in terms of the physical development of a community, but really it's about so much more than that. I'll be talking a bit about employment here, but the goal really of economic development is to support improvements to the quality of life. So as I mentioned, we'll start by talking a little bit about employment and much more detail on some of those other factors like physical development on the boards as well. I think the big takeaway here is that employment in Braintree has really recovered quite nicely from the onset of the COVID pandemic. We've reached levels of unemployment that are comparable to pre-pandemic and are quite low, below 5%, which means there are not a lot of people actively looking for work at the moment. I think it's also interesting to note that Braintree tends to outperform both the county and the state. So things do tend to go pretty well here in Braintree. Labor force participation is another thing we look at, and this is really the level of engagement in work among the community members. This follows what we saw with unemployment, right? There's certainly a big hit taken at the outset of the pandemic, but Braintree is again recovering nicely and again outperforming some of the comparison geographies that we typically use. This combination of low employment and high labor participation really means that there are not a lot of available workers in Braintree at the moment. And looking at the other relatively high rates of participation in Norfolk County as well, there really aren't a lot of available workers regionally. So that's something that we really take into account when we're thinking about policy decisions around attracting businesses and retaining businesses. There's some key takeaways that we want you to keep in mind as you're looking at the board and thinking about economic development in Braintree. Braintree has a growing population, and a growing population means that there are new opportunities for businesses and possibly new additions to a diverse workforce. I think when we think about the greater Boston economy generally, the thing on everyone's minds right now, research and life sciences, and we're seeing that when we look at the data. The flex and R&D spaces in the Braintree area are at historic lows. And this is motivating a lot of landowners, a lot of property owners to transition some other types of space towards this kind of space. And repositioning, as we call it, means investing in some of those existing lab spaces maybe that haven't seen a lot of investment in the past few years. Juliet talked about this as well. Regional transportation access is a huge plus for Braintree. There are a lot of communities out there that really envy the level of connection that you have to the regional economy through your transportation systems. And this is, as I said, a really big driver for a lot of commercial and industrial businesses. This is something they look for in their real estate, in where they locate. And the last thing I think we want to leave you with in economic development is that the era of the greenfield development, the large-scale, open tracts of land development that has happened historically in Braintree, particularly in the 80s through the 90s and early 2000s, is really coming to an end if it isn't already over. There just is not a lot of available land at that scale anymore. And so a lot of the new development that might be happening in Braintree will have to be redevelopment of existing properties, infill development, which means finding some of those spaces between existing buildings that can be built on, or adaptive reuse of existing properties. Public facilities and services, I think this is a little bit more straightforward in terms of how people understand it. This is how the city maintains its infrastructure, both in terms of things like buildings, but also the services that they provide, the social infrastructure in a lot of ways too. So Braintree owns a fair amount of square footage, more than 220,000 square feet of government and recreation buildings. And beyond that, 700,000 square feet in public school buildings, and there are 10 of those public school buildings. Something that we really want to focus on, and the takeaway for you, is that the average age of these publicly owned buildings is, they were built in 1947, which is really quite old compared to a lot of the communities that we work in this region. Thinking specifically about services, police calls have risen. Certainly they rose to a high in 2019, but since then have dropped a bit, pretty considerably in fact, from 27,000 to 20,000. Prior to the pandemic, we saw there was higher visitation at the senior center. I think that this is probably understandable given public health concerns. And similarly, demand for transportation services was increasing. As Juliet was talking about, we're still working through the data in the post-pandemic world. Calls for fire and EMS also rose into 2019. But again, since then, the calls have also dropped, not quite as significantly as on the police side. And the Braintree DPW, something that I think is important to note, that they have a responsibility for a lot of different features across the town. They have responsibility for engineering, they have responsibility for solid waste, water, sewer, roads, stormwater, recreation, cemeteries, a golf course, and public buildings and grounds. So this is really a lot for a department to cover, and may help explain why some of the buildings in town are as old as they are and have not necessarily seen as much investment and upkeep as buildings that age might need. All right, back to you, Delaney.
Great. Okay, so before we send you out to do the open house portion of our event, which I know you're all itching to get to, we're going to just go over a few ways that you can be involved beyond today. As Jen said, this is a really long planning process going through next summer, so there's going to be a lot more opportunities for events like this and others that you can get involved, give your feedback, learn more about what we're doing. So if you haven't seen it already, we have a website for the master plan. This is a snapshot of what it looks like. You can use this tiny URL. It's just tinyurl.com/BraintreeMP. That will take you right to the website, or you can scan this QR code, and we will be posting information about upcoming meetings, posting documents on this website, just anything, more events like this banner at the top that's advertising for the event today. So if you ever want to know anything about what's going on with the master plan, you can check out the website. Starting this summer, we're also going to be having a lot more engagement activities. One of them is called Meeting in a Box, and it's where we provide you a packet of information where you can host a meeting in your own house. And it doesn't require a lot of prep work from your end. We give you everything that you need, including scripts of what to say and what to ask people questions about. You can invite a few neighbors or friends over for coffee or tea, or get your book group together, or meet up somewhere else, like a coffee shop, and just talk about master plan and get more information and feedback about the planning process. And this will be launched this summer, probably about a month from now, in late June. We're also going to have a community survey that will be live all summer. It'll be online, and we'll have some paper copies available, so you can look out for that also in about a month. We'll also want to talk to you this summer at events around town. We'll be organizing ways for our master plan committee members to be out at a ton of events this summer, and you might see a table kind of like this with some activities and just more information about the plan. So look out for your committee members this summer. And we'll also be having another community forum in the fall, just like today, but with different information, because we'll be a little bit further along in the process. So you can look out for that. And all of this information will be on the website so you can stay up to date with it, all of it. Okay, so today, I'm sure you've noticed all of these boards around the room. We have different stations of 2 to 3 boards per station with some information. These are the topic areas that we'll be covering and what we just went through in our key findings of the presentation. And each station has 3 boards. One of them is an infographic type board with more statistics and information, kind of like what we presented just now, but more in depth and more other information. We have a map of key resources, and we also have this blank page on the right, and this is where we're really looking for your feedback. We're asking 2 key questions on these. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I was going to be like a Vanna White. Okay, yeah. But I forgot to bring them.
So we're asking you 2 key questions here. So what are the primary issues related to this topic area, and what are the primary opportunities? And you can take a Post-it note and a pen to write your answers to these questions and place them on the board. There's a table in the back with a bunch of Post-it notes and pens available for you to have supplies for this part of the event. So we're really just looking for your feedback for these. Yeah.
Mayor, could you just point people where that table is? You're standing kind of near it. It's right... No, the table with the Post-it... Yeah. So if everybody turns around, that's where you get these Post-it notes and pens. Okay, good.
Yeah, great. So, yes, and at each of these stations, there will be a master plan committee member and or a member of our team. So look for anyone with a name tag that's printed with a logo or the town seal. Feel free to ask any of us questions and engage with us to learn more about the topic at the station. We also have a few other stations. These 2 images on the right are some questions about you so that we can learn more about who is here today. You probably already visited this station as you walked in, but if you missed it, just feel free to head back there and answer these questions for us. And we also have a table where we want to ask what you love about Braintree and describe 3 words that describe what you love about Braintree. And that table is in the back right of the room over here. Great, so thank you. If I can ask all of the master plan committee members to stand up and head to your stations, then I think we'll be ready to turn it over to the open house portion.
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're actually collecting all of your feedback because we wouldn't be able to have everyone give us that amount of feedback by doing verbal. So you can talk to any one of us, and I can actually help you. Why don't I come and see you right now? Yeah, I hear what you're saying. That's not the process that we lined up today. But I'll come over and talk to you right now. So thank you. Everyone can go ahead and participate, and don't feel rushed. We have plenty of time.
So we are here at the Master Plan Forum in Cahill Town Hall, and we are at our Historic and Cultural Resources section, and we're here with Councilor Joe Reynolds and Ron Walsh, and we have some questions for folks. And the first question is, what are the primary issues related to historic and cultural resources in the community? So Ron, why don't you tell us what you think?
Well, I think that we need true documented historical events about Braintree that must be taught and discussed in our educational facilities, so people get an understanding. If they just move into the community, they understand where Braintree came from and how it's been developed and where we go from here, and I think that should be included in it.
Well, that's a great thing. Thank you, Ron. And we have one other question here today, and I'll turn it over to Councilor Reynolds to ask that of Mr. Ron Walsh.
Sure. Thank you, Melissa, very much. So what are the primary opportunities, Ron, you see related to historical and cultural resources in the community? So again, what are the primary opportunities that you think that are going to present themselves with this process?
Well, I think new people that move into the community can adapt a little better by finding out information from some of the older folks that have been here.
Okay.
And they have a history of their being brought up in the town or in the community. So I think that can be a benefit to the new folks that move in.
Mm-hmm.
They'll have a better understanding of, what it means to the people that have been here that help develop the community.
Okay.
So I think that would be a benefit to the...
So from a historical standpoint, we know that what was mentioned today, that Braintree has seen quite a bit of changes in 400 years.
Yes.
So how do you feel that's a part of the character, this historical and cultural character of the town, and how that's going to play forward?
Well, I think if we go back even further than the 400 years, we have a history, not just in this country, but globally, that people have had conflicts with each other over the years, and to understand their history, we can go back to the indigenous people of the country in other countries too as well. So I think we have to focus on being more involved with each other as a unit, working together to develop the community in a better way, in a more kinder, gentler way. It's not easy. Everybody's different. We all have different ideas, but I think we have to work together and pool those ideas that are beneficial to the community as a whole. Okay? Not any specific, things, but that will work itself out if the people work together in that respect with each other.
That sounds great. I think that's an excellent approach. I mean, as far as acknowledging that people are going to have differences of opinion, but being respectful of one another's points of view, which will get us to a place that we can agree upon.
Right, and I think that, again, that relates back to our founding fathers and those that have developed the country, have brought forth ideas, ideals, and respect for one another, and we have a Constitution, and I think we have to follow that Constitution. Things are changing, but the document itself is not changing.
Right, it's part of our culture.
It's part of our culture.
There you go. I appreciate this, Ron, really.
You're
This has been terrific.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you coming and come down today. One, being involved, stepping up and showing by example what we all can do for our community.
Well, we have to try. We have to
All
try
right.
harder. Thank you, Joe.
Terrific, Ron. Thank you.
All right. Hi, good afternoon. We're standing at the housing section of the Master Plan Community Forum this afternoon. My name is Erin Joyce. I'm on the planning board happen to be with a fellow planning board member, Mr. Tom Kent, and he's going to answer a couple questions on housing that we have been sharing this afternoon. So the first question we have, what are the primary issues related to housing in our community? So what do you think are the primary issues?
Well, I think we have a lot of empty nesters with big houses, and there's no place for them to go if they want to stay in the town. So we have an opportunity, which is the next question, I guess, to maybe repurpose some of the buildings in the town that aren't fully occupied. We can look at that.
Honestly, that's been the common theme this afternoon, talking to residents that, affordable senior housing, what is the next housing trend? So I think that's spot on with what we've seen today at this housing forum.
Hi, we're at the Economic Development Station for the Master Plan Steering Committee, where we're getting everybody's input for the new Braintree plan. This is Gail, and Gail is going to let us know what her thoughts are about the economic development in Braintree. There are two questions. One is, what are the primary issues related to economic development in the community? And the second question of what are the primary opportunities related to economic development in the community? So, Gail, what is your opinions or what are your comments?
Well, I think I'd like to see some of the open spaces or the buildings that aren't being used right now go into things like IT companies or medical development companies or some diversity beyond shopping and restaurants. So I'm hoping that part of what this plan is having an overview of how many vacant buildings or unused lots could be used for something other than housing. I know that is an issue, but I'd like to see it be a place where we can get some tax revenue and have job opportunities where we're so close to, the MBTA and all that.
Right, and then how do we attract those, like businesses, and what makes Braintree more attractive to have them come in?
Yeah, if we have to give them some kind of initial tax break, I can understand where that might pay off in the end. But what I'm not happy about is like some of the condos that are saying, okay, retail space on the bottom, and for 10 years you don't have to pay taxes. Meanwhile, those retail spaces are not being leased because there's no parking, as you've seen down in the landing especially. Yeah, which isn't all of us, but I mean, it's not just Braintree, but yeah, we have to take a look at some land to bring in revenue and not just housing.
And update those buildings that have been sitting vacant or in disarray and have renewed life in them.
Right, and make them something that's appealing. I mean, a developer has to, or a business has to have a reason to think this is a great spot. But
excellent. Well, thank you, Gail, for your input. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
So we are back at another station today at the Community Forum for our master plan. And we're at the Public Facilities Station, and I'm here with resident John Thompson, and we're going to ask him a couple questions about the facilities here in Braintree. So, John, what are the primary issues related to the public facilities in the community, in your opinion?
Good afternoon, everyone. My opinion, a lot of the public facilities have a heavy use by the citizens and the non-citizens, like the library, elder affairs. They could use larger facilities if the town can handle it financially and if they have the space to provide it.
Okay. And our second question today, John, is what are the primary opportunities related to the public facilities in Braintree?
Opportunities possibly would be like combine some of the facilities, like the library and the police department are open late. That might be a logical one for combining into one bigger super building. Elder affairs could move in because they're only open like during the morning and the afternoon hours. Again, the problem is finding space for all of these facilities, and of course you can't avoid the cost factor.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for your time today, John, and thank you for attending. So, we are at another station today at our Master Plan Forum here at Town Hall, and we are at the Sustainability and Resiliency Station, and we're here with Jay, and we're just going to ask him a few questions and thank him for coming today. So thanks for coming, sir. And our first question is, what are the primary issues related to sustainability and resiliency in the community?
Well, I think that's all tied in with the second question, which is the opportunities. I think that this is the time that we need to be looking at really doubling down on clean energy. Planting a lot of trees to give us natural shade and getting away, even though the power in Braintree has always been spectacular, ways to increase it and to stabilize the electric grid so that more and more people can think about getting away from heating their homes with gas and oil and going to electric powered and much cleaner and efficient heat pump technology. I think that will go a long, long way to improving the quality of life in Braintree overall. Air quality around Braintree at certain times is just bad. When it gets really warm, and we're going to start to feel it this weekend, it gets hard to breathe out there. And the less particulate matter in the air, the better off we'll be. And waiting at all to implement something like this, every day we wait is just making it harder and harder to gain the ground that we need to do.
Thank you very much for your time today, Jay, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're at the Open Space, Natural Resources, and Recreation Station at our Master Plan event, and I'm here with Peter Herbst, who's also a member of the Master Plan Steering Committee, and we're going to ask Peter a couple questions for those watching at home. So, Peter, what are the primary issues related to open space, natural resources, and recreation in the community?
Well, I've talked to probably 15 or 20 people who walk by today, and it's interesting that there's a common issue that everybody has passionate spots in Braintree. A lot of people like Pond Meadow, a lot of people talking about Cranberry Pond, which I actually didn't even know about before today. And so there's a lot of people who are passionate about these spots, and they also point out that we need to do more to preserve these spots. Probably 4 people talked about the fact that you used to at one point be able to swim in Sunset Lake, and what could actually be done to change that and be able to swim in that again. So I think the themes were just preserve and protect what the real gems that we do have in town right now.
Okay, great. And our second question is, what are the primary opportunities related to open space, natural resources, and recreation? So there's obviously a common theme to preserve what we have, but what do we have for opportunities moving forward?
Well, I think moving forward, we've got some resources here that need to be better promoted, and then like Cranberry Pond was one example. Many people mentioned that it's a great spot, and I asked, where do you park? And they said, well, there's no parking. You have to park on a side street and then figure out how to walk through the forest to get there. So I think there's probably opportunities to enhance accessibility of a lot of the existing places that we already have.
All right, great. Thank you so much for your time today, Peter. So we're at our last and final station here today at the Master Plan Forum at Town Hall, and I'm here with Kyle Johnson, and we're going to ask him a couple questions about transportation and circulation and transit in Braintree here. So Kyle, what are the primary issues related to transportation, circulation, and transit in the community, in your opinion?
I think it depends. Transportation, I would take, if you talk about traffic management, infrastructure and so forth, is one thing. I don't know, transportation is a rather large category. Circulation and the transit use are 2 different things. I think that I was on the Board of Selectmen when they initially opened the commuting train station. It was designed for commuters, not designed to service the business centers of Braintree or provide jobs. So what I think is that's probably an underused asset because it's too small of a station, does not have adequate parking to attract people sufficiently to be able to use it. I do think that we're fortunate to have the Ivy Street Rotary so that we have a better traffic circulation, but I do think that because of our location, we're impacted by commuting traffic from communities to the south and west of Braintree. I think a lot of changes have been made. I think the improvements to the Granite Street corridor with the signalization has made that, I travel that every day, at least once, and it moves better. But I do think people are always complaining about the traffic. You can see the number of questions on the board. I don't know what it is. I do think that we should do some things in the town to improve sidewalks, to add sidewalks. There's many roads that don't have sidewalks, even those that are adjacent to state ways or commuting ways. And I think that it would encourage better use of transit for bus systems. I know in the Highlands, that's particularly, they've made some changes and protected some areas, but it was a result finally stimulated by some fatalities that recently occurred. But I think the state and the town have improved that corridor. I think overall, people are always going to think that there's too much traffic, but because of our location to the interstate and state highway system, we're always going to experience that.
Well, thank you, Kyle. And I think the second question, which you touched on a little bit in your first answer, is what do you think are the primary opportunities related to transportation, circulation, and transit in the community?
Well, I said one thing is that I think that as economic development changes the use to some of our business property corridors, particularly off of Granite Street as it goes into the Randolph line, is, as a greater demand for a different type of use, I think we should take advantage of that. Braintree has problems in that they have residential strips that are in front of business properties. I think that zoning can change a lot of those things, rezoning properties. I think that as far as the circulation, I think we have to take, there has to be better protections, if you will, into neighborhoods, again, and to try some traffic calming measures. I know that to reduce speeds and a lot of other things, but those are the things that improve the quality of life and transportation. Braintree's fortunate. Many people use the interstate and state highway system to go to work. I saw that it was very high, that at one time, people that lived in Braintree worked in Braintree, a lot of the small businesses, particularly in what's now the village districts, but that's changed dramatically. Those are owned by people who necessarily don't live in Braintree, and I think the workforce is indicated 87% of it uses the state and interstate highway system. So we're both benefited, and it creates an opposite reaction as far as the volumes of traffic.
Well, thank you very much, Kyle. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.